I'm recording this in my office in Boylan, so if you hear noises, they're coming from the corridor outside. We're talking about L'Emigrante, a film that was produced in the early mid-70s in Italy. It's an Italian film that tells the story of a young man who decides to come to America to look for his father. The father had emigrated 20 years earlier, but he disappeared and the family did not receive any news, just one postcard when he first arrived. So Peppino Cavallo, the name of the young man, decides to embark on this adventure. This film is a comedy, so it's easy to watch and easy to follow, but we can also see this film as extremely critical toward the subject that it describes. And the subject is America in the 20s, 30s, and Italians in America, or if you want to call them Italian Americans. Why is it critical? There is a little story behind it, not just the film, but the era when it was produced. It was the early to mid-70s. Europe culturally underwent a remarkable and noticeable shift toward the left. It was rather critical of America, and as a result, I would say primarily of the Vietnam War, but also of this notion of imperialism and unbridled capitalism that America embodied and still embodies in the world. At the time, society in Europe, the major countries, were shifting more toward a social democratic socialist position. And the intellectual elite, filmmakers, writers, artists of all kinds, were very much in tune with these novel ideas. Not novel, but this skeptical attitude about capitalism and what it represents. So the writer and the director of this film were very much part of that elite, intellectual elite in Italy. And the film, again, is a comedy, but it does present a rather unflattering portrait of America in those days. Where do we see this? Well, we see it from the beginning, when Peppino Cavallo, when the ship that carries Peppino Cavallo arrives in the New York port. Peppino has been arrested on the ship because of the reason you'll see in the film, but when he is about to be taken away by the police in a paddy wagon, the policeman is approached by a gentleman wearing a fedora. For those of you who apply a certain meaning to that particular hat, and the gentleman talks to the policeman, and shortly after we see that the paddy wagon stops in the middle of nowhere, the door is open, and Peppino Cavallo is let go. This shows, at least, if not outright corruption, it shows collusion. And it shows the willingness of breaking the rules. The police that is willing to do someone a favor. The favor is not to Peppino, but it is to the person who asked for his release. Now, we could pick on several other aspects, and you will see quite a number of them if you pay attention to it. Peppino encounters this mythical, quote-unquote, mythical figure, the anarchist, the Italian anarchist who's protesting everything. He has been in jail dozens of times. He's a bomb maker. He's a troublemaker. Although clearly he is a candid soul, a kind individual. But he's protesting racism, injustice, capitalism, you name it. The anarchist in the European, but primarily, well, not primarily, but in the European culture, is an archetype, is a standard character. And he's very similar to the character of the drifter in American movies. The man without a family, the man without name, Clint Eastwood, or before him other famous actors. They were primarily characters in Western movies. They arrived from nowhere. They have a sense of justice inside themselves. They help out the poor, wipe out the rich and oppressive, and eventually they disappear. They ride out in the sunset. The anarchist is very much the same kind of figure. He's a romantic, not in the sense of romance, but someone who has these very lofty ideals of justice, social justice, and equality. And the only way, at the end of an analysis, it's not just, they don't act out of rage and anger, but at the end of an analysis, political and otherwise, they conclude that the only way of improving society is revolution. They do not believe in organized revolution like the communists or socialists. They believe in individual acts of terror. They are terrorists in many cases. And we'll see. We are going to have more about this particular time. For some reason, American anarchists were in large part from Italy, or, let's put it differently, a lot of Italian activists were anarchists. We find that, for instance, a lot of Jewish immigrants who embraced ideals of social justice gravitated much more heavily toward the Communist Party and the socialist organizations. Italians and other groups were mostly involved in the labor union movement, and we will have a chance to see this. And as far as Italians are concerned, a noticeable group embraced anarchist ideals. Whether this has to do something with a cultural background, it's too complicated to get into it. Maybe tradition, but the fact that the director chooses to insert the character of the anarchist is not purely coincidental. The anarchist, who at the end, we will see, not only is a victim of himself, but represents in probably the most shocking, imaginably shocking way, the defeat of the individual in front of the forces of capitalism. He has to sell parts of himself in order to survive in this cruel world. But the film is also very critical about Italian Americans. Who are they? What are they represented as in this country? Primarily, they become mafia figures. The dominant representation of Italian Americans by an Italian director and writer, is of Italian Americans as members of mafia. We also see another very stereotypical representation. You could say it's kind of benevolent, but it is in Italian as a pizzaiolo, the owner of the pizza restaurant. So we see heavily used stereotypes. In terms of criticism of America through symbols, clearly the character of Pamela, which is a phenomenally well-written character. Probably it is my most favorite character in the film. Obnoxious as unbearable as she is, it's a great role. I think The actress must have had a great fun doing this. Who does she represent? The wealthy Anglo-Saxon, rich, clueless America, Epicurean, devoted to pleasure, interested only in partying, spending money, enjoying life, without a clue as to what is going on around herself. And we see this clearly throughout the film, his particular character. There are some other American characters, not that many. There is something that you will probably miss. The barber, the owner of no, it's not the barber shop, the owner of the morgue, the funeral home, who has a British accent, for instance, and affected manners based on the signs and symbols that I can recognize. Clearly, the suggestion is that this person is homosexual. The profession and the mannerism plus the British accent in Italian are all indication of this sexual orientation of this individual. And then there are two minor, very minor characters, the two African American. One is a maid, is helping the singer, whose name in this very moment escapes me for reasons I can't. Rosita. Is it Rosita? And at the very end, we have Peppino Cavallo's cellmate, who's also African American. Now, this could be seen as conventional stereotypes. So, without much thinking, the director and the writer decide that these people belong, one as a maid and the other one in jail. But isn't that also a very subtle form of criticism? These are the roles that America reserves for this minority. The men, they put them in jail. The women, they turn them into servants. Overall, yes, the political message is what it is. And at the very, very end, the conclusion, the inevitable happy ending, is also indicative of the criticism that America is not really the paradise that many people make it up to be. I would like you to pay attention to the two Napolitan songs. We are going to examine them in detail individually. You will only see a few bars from the songs, but all of them contain messages, and they contrast very, very directly with the final song that you hear at the very end of the movie, which is the most famous Italian song in America, O Sole Mio, Son of Mine, which is an ode to the beautiful climate, the beautiful scenery, and the sunny disposition of the Napolitan people. I'm going to stop here. I'm probably going to do some editing, and I'm going to post it.